Welcome everybody to Herstory Chats at the Norco Public Library. Our guests today are writers, comedians, and podcasters. Caitlin Durante and Jamie Loftus are co-hosts of the Bechdel Cast. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us here at our teeny tiny library here in Horsetown, Norco. So what's the story behind the creation of the Bechdel Cast?
Caitlin, do I take this one?
Sure, I'll take it. It's mine. So basically, I was like, well, I'm a comedian in Los Angeles, so I need to have a podcast.
Legally, you do have to.
Legally, it's required.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, what do I know anything about? Movies. I brag, have 2 degrees in film. And then I was like, okay, what more specifically should it be about? And I sort of just took inventory of the movie podcasts that already existed and where there might have been like a gap of kind of perspective. And I was like, well, and then also I was just like, well, a lot of movies treat women really poorly or don't include them meaningfully at all. So that's just sort of led to the basic premise of the podcast. And then I reached out to Jamie and said, hey, do you want to do this with me? And she's like, yes. And the rest is history or herstory.
Yeah, and on my end, I had not seen many movies, and it was like a combination of like wanting to work with Caitlin on something and knowing that it was just gonna, like, I don't know, change the way I saw stuff in a positive way, which it definitely has, and also a frustrating way, but yeah.
So before you developed your Bechdel Cast lens that you used to analyze media, were there any patterns you noticed regarding the treatment of female characters? Caitlin kind of already touched on it a little bit.
I think that it was just kind of, we went into the show, Caitlin, correct me, I mean, we went into the show knowing that it was generally bad. We just, from having consumed media, we knew that women were not treated well, but we didn't have that much specificity when we started, and so I think the process of the show has been us recognizing patterns and recognizing tropes that we didn't previously have names for characters of like all genders. I think that something that has like surprised me in the course of doing this show is not just noticing the tropes of how poorly women and anyone of a marginalized gender is treated, but also just like the hyper masculine tropes that you see kind of on the other end of that spectrum. So it's just been a whole, we're still finding new stuff all the time, it feels like.
Oh yeah, every movie we cover, it seems like, I can't believe we haven't talked about this before, but here's a new thing that we need to bring up. Because yeah, going in, I had noticed things, I think just subconsciously or unconsciously, but I didn't necessarily have like the language really to meaningfully talk about it, or just the full awareness of like how deep it runs, and like just how, I mean, so many movies, putting them through a critical lens, and specifically like an intersectional feminist lens, you realize just how quickly they unravel and how like deeply misogynist and homophobic and transphobic and racist, and I mean, name it, and in a movie does it.
It's in blockbusters. It's so like it blows my mind. Like even like as recently as last week, we'll like find ourselves talking about the same kind of trope again, and then kind of realize in real time, oh, we've talked about something like this 5 or 6 times. This is like a thing, and then we give it an arbitrary name. Like, is that how analysis works? Don't know. That's how we do it though.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, the show definitely has just like helped me become a more critical thinker, definitely helped me more critical of the media that I consume. It's just helped me become a better feminist. And
Yeah.
we've like, our growth has been very trackable, I think, like from our very early episodes where we like, if we were to go back and listen to them now, which I would not put myself through the torture of that, but like, there were just things that we would like much more easily pick up on now that we wouldn't have noticed, you know, like 4 or 5 years ago when we started the podcast. So yeah, it's been a just a good thing for me, and I don't want to speak for you, Jamie, but like
it's been a horrible thing for me.
It's helped me grow into a better person. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially like the insights that our guests bring to the table is so integral to the show. Like it's yeah, I love some of the insights that guests have brought over the years. It's like, oh my God, how did I not see that or understand that? And we've been so lucky to have such a wide array of amazing people on the show that have taught us, and it's made me like a better writer too. Like I don't write the way that I did 5 years ago, and the show has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Is there an historic female identifying person whose story has influenced or impacted you, and can you tell me about them?
This is tougher.
This is tougher.
I have an answer that I like. I had to think on it. It's kind of, I mean, this kind of speaks to something that we're talking about, or Caitlin and I talk about kind of off mic a lot of like, we haven't, because we are always trying to balance like movies that are really influential with like movies that aren't spoken about enough and just kind of all this stuff. There are so many wonderful female directors that we have not yet covered on the show that is like, we've got to do that. Someone who I've learned more about in the past year, who I've like gone deep in the sauce with, is Ida Lupino, and who like got her start as like this old Hollywood actress and had an ambition to direct, and kind of, I feel like you can kind of see how a lot of modern female directors have kind of followed this trail that Ida Lupino blazed, from going from being a heavily objectified movie star into becoming a director, having a lot of creative control, and being able to basically prevent her actors from being treated the way that she was early in her career. And it's cool because once I knew more about her, you kind of see that pattern play out a lot now. I wish that there were more female directors who didn't first have to become extremely famous as an actor, but I think you can, see that present in like Barbra Streisand's career, and right now Olivia Wilde's career. Like, talk about an actress who was really heavily sexualized and is now, kind of calling the shots. Emerald Fennell, and the list goes on. Lena Waithe. So I'm an Ida Lupino stan. She also directed some of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone. I don't know. She's great.
Oh, interesting. I'm gonna have to look her up and check her out.
She's great.
My answer to this question, even just like not specific to women in the film industry or in entertainment, just sort of like a broader thing, I was finding it difficult to answer this question. And I think that, like you said, Jamie, it speaks to just a larger cultural problem, where if I'm like trying to figure out what women were influential to me, like who are like in the public eye, or like historical figures, just in any area, politics, sciences, entertainment, like anything, they're just, not to say there haven't been influential women, but like growing up, they weren't the focus of like education. Like I was not taught about them in school, or they, movies were not made about them as much because of this like systemic larger patriarchal cultural problem where like women have not been the focus of anything really ever. So
Yeah.
I just didn't like, I wasn't exposed to that much in the way of like influential women who I felt like I could look up to or be inspired by, just to a great extent growing up. Not to say that they didn't exist, it's just that like my exposure to them was just so minimal. So anything that I sort of drew inspiration from was, or anyone, I guess, I don't even know who it did inspire me. Is it, I don't know, like Garfield the cat? Like
Diablo Cody was big for me as a teenager. I feel like she was, because Judo came out when I was in high school, and she was like the first female screenwriter whose name I knew, which is like, I don't know, it's so depressing because it's like obviously there's a ton of female screenwriters, but they're not revered in the same way that male screenwriters are. And so that was the first time that I knew of like a female writer with a distinct style, and like, and of course people just like trashed on her constantly because that's what happens when a woman does anything successfully for the first time.
mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, I think it just speaks to how, if like women had been given more opportunities to make things in Hollywood or in whatever capacity, there would be like more people I could have looked up to as a child. But yeah, so it's just it like all boils down to representation matters. Because I truly was like drawing inspiration from, I said it as a joke before, but I'm literally like, no, that is true. Like Garfield the cat was like my idol as a like 10-year-old.
I mean, fair,
So
fair.
thank you.
So I guess this doesn't apply to Caitlin. Did describe a person, but Jamie, how did you learn about the people that you mentioned?
From, I guess this is like sort of but like from female creators who prioritized telling me about them. Like I think that the three women I consume the most movie media from would be like Karina Longworth, who does You Must Remember This, and mentioned Ida Lupino a number of times, and like had this, she in LA, she like had this whole movie night curated around Ida Lupino's movies and just like educating people about her. And that was something like a year and a half ago, and that opened my eyes to her. And then there's an amazing YouTube channel called For Harriet, where the host, whose name is Kimberly, like she does a ton of education and just like really funny commentary on movies, and specifically Black women in movies. And then there's another, I watch a lot of YouTube because I'm 14 years old, but there's another YouTube channel called Be Kind Rewind that kind of analyzes award show culture as it pertains to women specifically. And she focuses on actresses, but she did this great series on actresses who became directors. And I learned more about Ida through that channel. So it was literally just like women who wanted me to know. Yeah, no men came into the equation.
But that's the thing though, right? Like this is like a more recent development, or like more like, so like, yeah, I was trying to think of like, of course today there are many women and people who inspire me and who I admire and look up to. I was speaking more to, I just want to be clear to be like, no women inspire me, even today in 2021. That's not,
Garfield.
It's more like growing up in like the 90s, early, like late 80s and 90s, they're just like, yeah, women's voices, women's work weren't prioritized, and therefore that contributed to that lack of exposure and etc.
What are your favorite sources of information regarding women's history now that maybe there are more sources out in recent times? that have kind of popped up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess the three channels that slash podcast. It's nice because I feel like there's a good combination of like YouTube and podcast overlap where you can just build a living off of just sharing this information with people. There's clearly like a huge desire for it, and I've learned so much from women on the internet. Just like we just had our friend Bridget Marie on, who has this amazing podcast called "There Are No Girls on the Internet," that just kind of uncovers mostly about just like the history of women online. That is really incredible. I love the show You're Wrong About. Their bag has kind of slowly become giving you the true story of like tabloid stories of the 90s that were really harsh towards women. And they had like a great series where they did a whole series on Nicole Brown, OJ Simpson's wife, and they just focused on her. And I don't know, I love pop culture, like hyper specific ephemera stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so many places now, and it's mostly run by women and queer people. So yeah, there's like
Mm-hmm.
infinity places.
Yeah, and people like there are like Twitter threads or Instagram posts where I like learn about someone I didn't know before, or like learn about an influential woman in history, because I'm just like doom scrolling through Instagram and I'm like, oh wait, there's actually a good thing here. Let me stop and read and learn about someone. So yeah, it's just echoing that it's social media, internet specific, and then there, like you said, Jamie, like there are specific people whose sort of like mission and agenda it is to like just bring to the forefront and educate people about like cool women and cool people in general, and people who have been marginalized and who history is kind of forgotten, but that they deserve recognition and they deserve for to be remembered.
Yeah.
The end.
What have you learned over the years about representation in literature and media of people of marginalized genders through your work on the Bechdel Cast and on the Lolita podcast, which we have not mentioned yet, which is Jamie Loftus's project?
I mean, we've learned that most. I guess okay. I'll try to give a more nuanced answer. I guess that most of the like popular media surrounding representation of any marginalized community has not been great over the years. But I think that what we've learned over time is that there have always been marginalized people making art that didn't get the same platform that the shitty art did. And so I feel like, yeah, with Bechdel Cast and Lolita, it's the most money and the most attention and the most cultural influence is always afforded to the most powerful creators, which are straight white guys, and always, has been in the West. And I think that it's like just a worthwhile activity and mission to, you know, find the voices that were not given the platform in their day. And I don't know, I feel like there's kind of this media narrative going on right now that women just started making movies like 5 years ago, which is like pretty aggressively insulting to women who have been making movies for as long as movies have existed, and just no one has cared until 5 years ago. And I think like finding that distinction of just because like it seems like women are trendy and like giving women agency is currently a Hollywood trend, that male writers are still fumbling. That there's it's just as important to recognize where we came from to where we are now, and to emphasize like having representation behind the camera as well as in front, because I think that's like another very common mistake that people are making like right now. and empowering marginalized creators and actually giving them the money and the creative power to make the story they want to make without also putting pressure on. I always get frustrated when it's like, you're a woman, you have to tell a story for women about women, and it's that's not true equality. True equality is like, you're you're a skilled artist, make your movie, because that's what white guys have been doing forever.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, what we've noticed in the different or just the array of movies we've covered and ones we haven't covered, just watching for fun. Remember doing things for fun.
I was like, remember that.
But the movies that handle representation the best are usually made by women, people of color, queer people, just like the people who are like able to tell their own stories, and it stands to reason that they're handling representation better. But like you said, Jamie, those are often the narratives and the movies that don't as easily make it into the mainstream, or historically haven't, so people don't know as much about them and haven't seen as many of those movies. So you just kind of have to, and this is becoming slowly less true, but for older movies, if you want to explore things that do have better representation, you have to like dig around, you have to do your research, and like kind of, it's like a treasure hunt,
Yeah,
and that kind of leads us into our next question. You guys have brought up most of your resources that you use are ones in the wild west of the internet, and we're an established we're an establishment where people should be able to find the types of information that you're looking for, but have not been able to, maybe. So what would you like to see libraries do to improve representation for marginalized groups?
Ooh, I have an idea for this. And this is maybe obvious and not very nuanced or anything. But I mean, like, I'd love to walk into a library and there just be like a large display where it's like, hey, look, these are all books written by women, or these are books written by people of color, or like, separate, like, here's some like great YA fiction by women of color. Over here we have really great memoirs by women of like any, just sort of like put them all on display, because that just makes it really easy for people to visibly like just discover them. Because a lot of people, they don't necessarily, it like, you sort of need to spoon feed a lot of people, and I like to be spoon fed sometimes. I can be lazy, and sometimes I just want someone to do the work for me. So if I were to go into a library and it's like, here, Caitlin, here's like 20 books on display that you can borrow and read a really cool narrative by a person who you may not have known about. I would like that.
Yeah, I guess like piggybacking off of that, of like, I don't know, like, yeah, I feel like sometimes you see the same pattern of like spotlighting this old white guy that everybody already knows about, and instead, even when it's like not a special month or a special occasion, just like making it a part of, like, if there's a display or a talk about sci-fi, just like bring a lot of voices into that conversation naturally, because I feel like, yeah, there are, whether it's, I mean, it's Black History Month right now, and so I feel like there's a lot of talk about Black authors, but it's like Black authors should just be a part of the year-long conversation. Like, it's when it's September, it shouldn't just be like, okay, and we're back to Dickens, baby. Or I'm like, clearly I don't spend enough time at the library because I'm assuming there's large displays about Charles Dickens all the time. But yeah, I think just like bringing a lot of voices into really any conversation, whether that's like a talk or a display or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think it sends a message when you're limiting Women's History Month, Black History Month. You're separating it from real history.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any books or movies about or by women that you'd like to recommend to our patrons for Women's History Month?
I have a list of movies.
Go for it.
I should read more books, is what I've learned. But I did just buy a bunch of books, but I haven't read them yet. So therefore, I cannot in good faith necessarily recommend them. But call me in a year, and then I'll let you know which ones I recommend. But as far as movies, I tried to pick some that were slightly off the beaten path, but maybe are still like familiar. But some movies either by and or about women that I really enjoy are, let's see, Thelma and Louise is one of my favorites. Moana, oh my gosh, what a great movie. The Farewell, I would highly recommend. Hustlers, I would highly recommend. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Watermelon Woman. Set It Off is a great heist movie. Josie and the Pussycats is just one of the best movies, the greatest movie ever. And let's see, what did I not say? I threw a Birds of Prey on the list because I really liked
a modern
it.
classic. I've been in the Lolita zone for some time. So I do have, but there's been, I think some of the most insightful criticism and discussions I've seen around that book are by women and survivors of abuse. So I would recommend in that section, Being Lolita by Allison Wood is an amazing memoir. The Real Lolita by Sarah Weinman is this really well-reported true crime book about a real life abduction that took place around the same time that Nabokov was pulling from when he wrote Lolita. I just read Such a Fun Age, which I know like everyone has been reading, but I finally had time and I like ate it up in a day. It was so great.
That's one of the ones I bought
really?
that I have not yet read.
You might. It's
so...
great. It's really good.
I'm excited.
And I read a play that I had not heard of before that was recommended to me called How I Learned to Drive by Paula Vogel. That is like heartbreaking and a difficult read, but it was so like well written, and I miss seeing plays. So if you miss seeing plays, read one. It's not the same, but it's still really fun.
Indeed.
All right, well, I guess that's it. Thank you guys so much for being here. This is like true